I'm an entertainer because I'm no good at doing anything else.
I was born near Old Trafford, Manchester United's football ground, which meant I was really a huge Manchester United fan. You know, the glamour of going to see Manchester United in 1967, 68, 69, 70. I think that moulded me in a funny sort of way. So ABC, we've tried to be the Manchester United of pop, you know. And the thing about football is some seasons teams win, sometimes they lose, sometimes they draw, sometimes they get the FA Cup, sometimes they get relegated. So, you know, pop music's not unlike professional football. And from an early age, I was into dressing up, if you like. I realised how exciting and interesting clothes can be. From days when I go down to a club and lie about my age to get in. I think you had to be over 14, so I'd pretend I was born in, quick bit of mathematics, 1956 or so. I was a suede head. I used to go down to a shop in Manchester called Ivor's. Stolen from Ivor was written on the bags. And there you could buy tank tops. And it was about the time of platform boots. And it was probably 1971, I think. That sort of period. It was funny because I think for me, you know, going to see football matches, you saw a lot of kids dressed in a certain style. It's how I got into music in a funny sort of way. You'd see things like Bowie and Roxy and Clockwork Orange written, you know, on the jackets, stuff like that. So, you know, I got interested in, you know, the way you look. You know, I wasn't really unconscious of things like that. So I'd be wandering around in my Crombie. You know, in those days, it was chic or important to have like a little red handkerchief with a type in there, and Royals, which are the very big brogues, braces. That was the style then. I always found school, it was always pretty good to go to school, see friends and stuff like that. I wasn't really, you know, a huge juvenile delinquent. I wasn't really like, you know, a moody James Dean solitary figure. I just had a good time when I went to school. After, I remember that sort of feeling of panic you get, and I think a lot of people get it, when you realise you've got to go out into the outside world, you've got to get a job, you know. And I never really knew what I wanted to do. And as a result of that, I ended up going to Sheffield University to study English literature, which sounds very academic and intellectual, but it was really, looking back on it, I just didn't, like a lot of people, I just didn't know what the hell I wanted to do. You know, a lot of my friends were becoming estate agents or getting jobs in factories, or one guy, you know, he was trying to become a professional footballer, or, you know, my friends had a lot of different, they were going into different outlets, but I just didn't know what I wanted to do. I've spent the last 10 years avoiding sort of trying to be an intellectual, and by that I just mean by believing that if you read something in a book, you've experienced it, and what's more important is to go out and experience things. In 1976, me and my brother Jamie went and saw the Sex Pistols at the Lesser Free Trade Hall. That was quite a momentous occasion for us. I guess I was about 17, 18 at the time. And people talk now about punk rock. It's almost a museum piece, but for me at the time, it really struck a chord with me, like it did a lot of people. It was what I've been waiting for. It was perfect. I had a fanzine called Modern Drugs. At the time when everybody was making fanzines, which are like little stapled together magazines where you go and review concerts. And mine was called Modern Drugs because I thought music was the most stimulating thing in the world. It still do, in a funny sort of way. And that it was, you could get up in the morning and listen to a record, it could make you feel great all day, you know, and you could put a record on at night and, you know, send you to sleep. So I'd write about the pop group, Public Image. And in Sheffield, around about 78, 79, there were all these groups coming, because Sheffield's quite an isolated city. And it's a steel city, you know, it's had a lot of knocks in the last 10 years. There's not a lot to do. There's a lot of people out of work. So it meant that you had to entertain yourself, basically. You know, major groups never used to come to Sheffield, so a lot of groups formed in that period. who have since become very, very successful. Groups like Def Leppard, like the Human League, Cabaret Voltaire, quite influential groups in their own way. So I would write about all these groups in my little fanzine. And that is how I met Mark White and Stephen Singleton. And that's how we formed the group. Initially, my first break into show business, it came when I went to interview a group called Vice Versa, which comprised, they were three-piece, but one of them had left. So they were a duo in effect, but I think they wanted to be a three-piece. And they invited me to go to Middlesbrough. And I thought it was just to like hang out, roadie, carry a few amps, or write a little review in my fanzine, which 30 people bought for 15 pence. So I went up to Middlesbrough with Mark White and Steve Singleton. And when I got there, they said to me, the group was like an electronics sort of trio. One guy had left, so they needed another guy. I think that's why they asked me to go along. So it was synthesizers. And in 78, 79, synthesizers were considered very strange, really. People would always say, "Where's the drummer?" I think they said to me, "Why don't you stand on stage?" And they had this oscillator, which was like a Holmby 00 train set. An oscillator's like the heart of a synthesizer, what makes the sounds. It was like a homemade one. They said, "Listen, you stand on stage and press a few buttons and we'll do the rest." And it was, so I did it. It was like a real off-the-cuff thing. We got bottled off stage, of course, but, once you have a taste for, being in a group, you can't stop. When we first formed the group, we were interested in making records, dance records, very polished sort of records. Records that competed with, Earth, Wind and Fire and Rolls Royce, but records that were very, very English. We were conscious that, the reason we called the group ABC was just that it didn't have any connotations with anything. It was just 3 capital letters. And that it meant we could do whatever we wanted. We could change each time. That's what we originally started out to do. We wanted to make very polished, dramatic records. We didn't really want to be, singing about... It's hard to describe, really. We didn't want to be like a lot of different groups that were around at the time. You see, it was quite a miserable period. People sort of were looking to the future and seeing, 1984. We wanted to make something that was a lot brighter and optimistic and emotional and dramatic. And also, we didn't want to just be playing in the George IV pub in Sheffield to a group of people that loved what we did. We wanted to make records that could travel around the world, that we wanted to get out there and compete. It was a very ambitious sort of undertaking for 5 lads, on the dole in Sheffield. But it was a dream, in a way. It came off to some extent. A lot of our early songs, I guess, were about romantic angst. Tears Not Enough, Poison Arrow, The Look of Love, All of My Heart. They were all quite dramatic songs about, very, very intense moments. I think that's the way I felt at the time. I think when you're in love and you fall out of love, it's one of the most intense things that can happen to you, beyond, birth and death. When you have a hit record, it's the greatest feeling in the world. It really is. It's like euphoria. It's a mixture of like fear, excitement. It's a great thing for any group. And when you have a hit record, you get the chance. You go on shows like Top of the Pops, and for me, I've been watching it since I was, a wee child. It's like an institution. But when you appear on that show, everybody that lives on your street sort of seems to know what you're doing. It's like you don't have to explain anymore. Yeah, I used to wear a gold lame suit. It's fantastic. It got to where we did that many shows in like 1982. It got to the point where I knew that if I didn't lock it in a cupboard, it would get out and just start walking down the street, like a Railbrook shirt ad. It had a life of its own. With our first LP, The Lexicon of Love, people still to this day, what is it, almost 10 years later, still remember tracks, and cab drivers whistle it at you, and these guys renovating the house next door to me, and they're always just tapping on the window and saying, yo, you know, shoot that boys narrow. And it used to bug me that people weren't. I'd rather the guys building the house next door were whistling, you know. In '83, we wanted to change dramatically. We didn't want to make a sequel to the Lexicon of Love. We felt we'd done something that was complete in itself. We didn't want to do Jaws 2, Jaws 3, Jaws 4. Maybe we should have done. And at the time, I came back off a tour and got back to Sheffield, and it looked like it had been decimated. It looked very, very different from life's, you know, in five-star hotels, you know, in international capitals through the world. There's a very big difference. We made an album called Beauty Stab, which was very much, it was about Britain, and it was about Sheffield, and it was about how we felt. We wanted to make something very down to earth, something that was the opposite of how people perceived us. So musically, it was quite raw, unfinished. A lot of loud electric guitars on it. Lyrically, it was, you know, there were songs on it like, on that record, like United Kingdom and That Was Then But This Is Now. It wasn't particularly well received here or in America. And it did really feel like we were very out of sync. You know, both Mark and myself felt that way. The group sort of gradually disintegrated. Steve Singleton left. David Palmer, a drummer who played on the record, had left, but the cracks were beginning to show. At the end of a tour, I always remember, we played a concert in Tokyo, and there's always a point in our show where I'd go like, and on drums, you know, on sax, and on drums, David Palmer, and he'd like throw out, you know, an 8-bar solo. And this last night, he just started off, and he was like, you know the Lucy show, Desi Arnaz Jr., her son used to play drums for like hours, you know. Dave was doing this solo, it sort of lasted like 15 minutes, like boom, 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 boom. I was like looking at Mark going, what is this, you know? And afterwards I realized, yeah, the Yellow Magic Orchestra, a very successful group in Japan, had been in the audience, and really it was Dave's audition for them, you know, on stage. He went and joined them for a period of time afterwards. He was a massive fan. With How to Be a Zillionaire, we took it to its logical extreme. We wanted to be, you know, like a cartoon group, like the Archies. Keith Breeden, our artwork guy, made these instruments, which were like this kind of thing the Archies would play. Only unfortunately, the Archies weren't a real group. You know, we were. So Fiona used to have this drum kit. It was like all turquoise, and you know, it looked like it should, you know, very Pee Wee Herman, if you like. And we were out of sync really with public taste, and it was a lunatic move. But I remember it got to the point we did a TV show somewhere, and they wouldn't let us go on. They wanted us to change, or they wouldn't let us go on with the instruments. They're going, look, there's a group over there, I shan't name them, and they got, this group were like performing on this TV show, miming on a TV show, and they got like Marshall stacks, you know, the whole number. And I was going, well, they're just as unreal as we are, you know, what's wrong with our setup? Yeah, I became very ill in 1985, yeah, I just felt really bad. I felt really exhausted for a long time. And I just thought, you know, if you're working really hard, you just think it's stuff like lack of sleep or food, you know. But, yeah, I spent quite a lot of time in hospital, having treatment, various things. So, things like that put a lot of things into perspective, you know. Yeah, I'm now healthy. I'm fully recovered from a bout of illness, but I was like diagnosed for like Hodgkin's disease, which is like a form of cancer. And it's only now that I'm fully recovered I realise how debilitated I was, you know. I just respect Mark White, you know, so much, because he stuck by me at a time when, you know, he could have packed the whole thing in and there would have been no ABC at a period when, you know, I just couldn't operate, you know, I had to just, you know, I was just recovering. And I think that is reflected in the music we're going to make over the next 10 years.
just the commitment we've got to each other to make the group something very strong and very entertaining, and to be all of the things we both want it to be. Mark White and myself were conscious that we wanted to make something that was a return to form, you know, that wouldn't just sell. We felt that we wanted to move back to like traditional virtues. You know, if you write a song, there are traditional ways around it. It's part of, the more experienced you get, there are two ways to skin a cat. There are a lot of people making records that try and make them in a way to seem weird, to seem experimental. It's like the difference between the way you dress in your mid-20s to when you're a teenager. You lose that desire to shock. You understand more about the overall scheme of things. So with Alphabet City, we wanted it to be, to have really traditional virtues. So we're using acoustic instruments, and the way it appeared was, we wanted it to be an amalgamation of everything we'd done before, because at the time, I kind of looked at it, I thought it might be the last record we ever made. You know, we had to, it felt like being a boxer, you know, going back into the ring, do you know what I mean? Well, Mark and myself now are at a point, we just finished recording an album called Up, which is a very euphoric, optimistic, warm record. We don't feel a desire to don masks or, you know, pull props out of a box. We're quite content with ourselves, so I feel a bit more natural. Just doing what we do as best we can. I still think it's brilliant, the fact that you can spend a bit of time with your friends, pluck something from thin air, a tune, a little phrase, and then put it out on a record, a little piece of plastic, and loads of people can get to hear it. And it might even strike a chord within people, you know, touch them, excite them, entertain them. It's quite a pure thing to do. From a distance, pop music can look pretty silly, but look closer and there's something noble about it, you know. And the beauty is it's so unpredictable, which is fantastic as far as I'm concerned. Nobody knows what's going to happen next.